In this video, I'm going to show you guys how to eat one of the most delicious wild plants on the eastern landscape. There's also some species out west that you can eat. This plant is incredible. It hosts so many different insects. It is the obligate larval food source for monarch caterpillars, and it's also been a human food for thousands of years of traditional use. People are still eating it today in sustainable ways. It's a very sustainable, I would even say regenerative crop to be harvesting. It's something you can easily steward on your landscape for abundance. It comes back year after year. It spreads more and more every year. It produces more and more vegetables every year. There's actually 4 distinct vegetables that come from this one plant, and they're not just run-of-the-mill wild foods. These are excellent gourmet wild vegetables when prepared properly. So we're going to go into how to prepare this properly, how to harvest it properly, how to eat it, some of the studies on the toxicity of it, and I'm going to alleviate some of your fears around eating it if you haven't had it before. So let's jump in. One important PSA before we even get started is you have to pinky promise me you are not going to eat this plant raw. It can absolutely poison you. It has what's called cardiac glycosides in it, which can slow your heart rate to dangerous levels if it's not prepared properly. But once it's prepared properly, it is a really, really delicious vegetable. Don't let that scare you off. Just use these traditional methods to render it edible. So it is mid-August here in Western North Carolina, and we're at the very tail end of milkweed pod season. What you'll see here are pods that are way too mature to harvest, so we just leave these to go to seed. You'll also notice there's a lot of these little orange insects on there, and these are a specialized aphid that really love milkweed. There's all kinds of different insects you'll find on here. Let's do a brief identification session on common milkweed so we know exactly what we're working with. There's several different milkweeds in the US, in the eastern US in particular, so you want to make sure you have common milkweed. It's by far the most common one that we see around, hence the name. So if you want to be exactly sure of what species you have, it's best to wait for the flowers next year and then ID it from the flowers. But at this point, we can see a few characteristics that are really distinct of common milkweed. So first of all, you notice we have opposite branching on the stems. The stems are right across from each other coming off of that main leader stem. All right, we obviously have the pods right now, which are very distinct. The leaves of common milkweed have a really pronounced midvein and usually have a little pinkish tinge to it. The leaves are simple, entire leaf margins. These are lance-shaped leaves. Now, another thing about common milkweed is it grows in spreading colonies like this, often in disturbed areas, edge habitat. You're not going to see it in the middle of the woods. You're going to usually see it in like a disturbed field or a field that's been grazed, or like the edge of this orchard that's been allowed to grow up a little bit. And why it gets its name, check out that milk that comes out when you break off a leaf. It's also important to note that not all milkweeds are edible. I'm here with a swamp milkweed, which is a great plant to grow, but not one that I would want to eat. Asclepias syriaca, or common milkweed, is the one that we're talking about in this video. I've also eaten Asclepias speciosa, or showy milkweed, which is also a good edible, and there's some reported other milkweeds that are edible, but I can't recommend them because I've not personally tried them yet. You also want to watch out for what's called dogbane. It's in the exact same family as milkweed, and it looks pretty similar to milkweed. There's some distinct characteristics, like the stem inside of dogbane is not hollow like common milkweed, and also your milkweed should never taste bitter even after cooking. Watch a video about how to identify dogbane and milkweed apart. There's plenty of videos on that, and it's pretty easy to tell apart once you're aware of the difference. So let's jump into how to harvest the correct milkweed pods. We're looking for a certain size, ones that are 1.5 inches or below. So for example, this guy, way too big. This guy is just about on the edge. This is about as big as I would ever harvest. I think this will probably be a really good milkweed pod to eat. Here's a perfect size pod right here. We'll definitely harvest this one. And also note, you start to get that milky latex on your fingers. Don't rub your eyes with that. It can be a little bit caustic to sensitive body parts. So one thing to note about propagation of milkweed, this plant right here is connected to all the other milkweed plants that we see out here. There's probably only 2 plants that were planted here as far as I know. They're all genetic clones of each other. They're all just spreading underground at this point. And so what we're gonna do, we're gonna leave behind a lot of these bigger pods, and they're gonna become mature seed within the next month or two. And then I'm gonna come back and harvest that seed and grow a lot of milkweed in the coming year. So before you go and start eating common milkweed, let's talk about some of the toxicology studies. Overall, milkweed is a very safe plant to eat when picked and processed properly, and we have thousands of years of recorded documentation of indigenous groups eating this, plus we have thousands of foragers each year that eat common milkweed successfully. These two cases are anomalies and are things that it's kind of hard to get to the bottom of them, but I'm going to lay it out for you so you have the information, and you can also find those studies online. So one of them is very insubstantial. It just talks about a guy who eats some milkweed pods for the first time, presumably, has some weird feelings, goes to the hospital, and he has elevated levels of what are called digitoxin, which is apparently produced by the cardiac glycosides in the milkweed. His heartbeat is lowered. After a few hours, the symptoms resolve. He's totally fine. The second case report talks about a lady who eats 8 to 10 boiled and sauteed common milkweed pods. This case is more interesting because there's actual photos that she took apparently of the milkweed pods. After looking at those, it's obvious that these are common milkweed indeed. With the guy's case, we don't know. He may have misidentified a different milkweed. Who knows? But with her, we see the picture of the pods. They've clearly been boiled. They're clearly at the right stage, and they're clearly common milkweed. So presuming that all of that's true, 8 to 10 pods is a pretty large dose for someone for the first time trying it. What I would encourage you guys to do if you're at all worried about this is to only eat one pod the first time after you've boiled it. I boiled them for about 5 minutes. You could go for longer. The toxins leach out into the water as you're boiling it, but it's a very isolated case among thousands and thousands of people who have done this successfully. So there's something going on there. Perhaps it's her unique physiology, and that's why I'm just imploring you to try a very small amount at first and maybe work your way up. 8 to 10 pods is probably about the max amount that I want to eat anyway. That's a pretty large helping of milkweed pods, but I've definitely eaten large quantities of milkweed at various stages and fed them to lots of people without any sort of complication. So once again, this is a very isolated case. Let's talk a bit more about pod size and edibility. So I have a ruler here, and we can actually check the size of these pods. You don't have to do this every time. Once you've done this a bit, you will have a sixth sense for it in the field, but I just want to show you guys for reference. So right here, we have what would be considered the perfect size pod. It's coming in right at 1.5 inches. We know that this is not too small. You can harvest them when they're really tiny too, like way under 1 inch, and they're edible, but there's not a whole lot going on the inside, and what's happening on the inside of these pods is what's really delicious. So this is a perfect size, 1.5 inches. It's going to be tender, and it's a substantial pod at that point. Now let's check out this one. This one's coming in a little bit over 2 inches actually, and this is not necessarily ideal, but I'm pretty positive this is still going to be an edible. Alright, so I'm going to cut this pod in half, and we'll look for some different characteristics to see how feasible this one is to eat. Alright, as I suspected, this one is in pretty good shape. What we're seeing here are the seeds beginning to form, and we have that silk at the top, which is what the milkweed uses to fly around and spread the seed. And that's starting to form, and the seeds are coloring up just a little bit inside of this pod. So we're really on the edge. So as you see with that, it passing 2 inches at that point, it's starting to become less edible at that point, but I think this one would still be good. All right, let's try another one. I just want to show this for reference. So we have this one that's coming in right at 2 inches, a little bit smaller than the previous one we looked at. Let's check out the inside of that one. All right, this is more of what we're looking for. So you can see that the silk and the seed are more undifferentiated. It's hard to tell. The seed is starting to form, but it's still white. We don't have any of that reddish tinge. And so right up to about 2 inches, you can still eat them. One thing that will happen with these larger ones is that bottom end and that top end can become a little bit tough. So one way you can eat the larger ones is to then come in and just chop off that bottom and that tip right there. And so then everything's gonna soften up uniformly when you cook it. But you could also just boil it longer. So That's a viable milkweed pod. The one that's a little bit over 2 inches, that's questionable. If we boil it long enough, I would eat it, but for a beginner milkweed forager, I would just leave that one behind. All right, so the big finale after all that. Got a few pods here. This one is a little bit too big and kind of woody on the ends, so I'm gonna cut those edges off, just show you all that one more time. And usually I will just pop them in and boil them whole, like so. These I already cut open for the demonstration, so I'm gonna boil those too. That's not ideal because the silk is gonna separate out from the pod a lot of times. But you can do that. And if you're concerned at all about those toxins, cutting them open will expose more surface area to presumably leach more of those out. All right, so that's it. They're boiling. This is exactly how I do it. I'll sometimes put the top on here to allow that to boil a little bit more efficiently, and we'll just wait for 5 minutes and then we'll drain it off and have a delicious milkweed lunch. So after your milkweed pods have been boiled, they're edible at this point, but you can then go and saute them in some oil. It's gonna make them taste even better. Put some ramp salt on there for flavor. It makes it distribute better if you bounce it off of your forearm like this. All right, bless this food. We got rice with some venison and Sautéing in there. We got the milkweed pods, of course, and some cherry tomatoes and ramp salt. As always, the milkweed pods are insanely good. What they're really known for is having almost a cheesy texture that's attributed to that silk and the seeds melting inside. One more thing on cooking milkweed. So some people don't even boil it. They will just fry it up whole or batter it and deep fry it. And it's really delicious to do. And I've done it many, many times for many years. At this point, I recommend boiling it, especially for people who are unfamiliar with milkweed and their reaction to it. Give it a good boil, once again, for 5 minutes in a decent amount of water, and you should be good. All right, let's leave it there for now. There's so much more that I could say about common milkweed. There's so many incredible vegetables within this one plant, but hopefully you feel more confident in harvesting and eating the pods. I'm here with a common milkweed that I grew from seed. I'm going to be talking about propagating common milkweed in future videos and other milkweeds as well. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button to learn more about that. Also, I have a zine that is hand illustrated and is all about eating common milkweed. You can check it out on my website at healingecosystems.com. You can also stay in touch by getting on the mailing list at healingecosystems.com and checking out our Instagram and Facebook at Healing Ecosystems. Thanks for watching. I hope this video inspired you in some way. Follow along for more wild food wisdom. Peace.